Life is Strange Before the Storm was released in August of 2017, a whole 2 years after the first game made its official debut. As the name suggests, it is a prequel to the events that take place when Max Caulfield returned to Arcadia Bay. Instead, this game's events center around a 16-year-old Chloe Price, Max's best friend and my favorite character from the first game. We also run into a few more familiar faces throughout our journey. The game focuses on the events that take place after Chloe's dad died and Max left her. There's also a big focus on the dynamic that takes place between Chloe Price and Rachel Amber, Chloe's sweetheart and the girl that went missing in the first game. It details both the highs and lows of their relationship, as well as a plethora of other obstacles that Chloe will have to face throughout the rest of the game. Now, I actually ran into some obstacles myself while playing this game's remaster. Feel free to have a look at that for yourself. I'll leave a card for it if you're interested. But the question still remains, does Before the Storm live up to the quality that was presented in the first Life is Strange? Is the storytelling on par with the original game? Is it any good in the first place? What about the characters? How do they hold up in all this? Well, there's only one way to find out. Our story begins with Chloe sneaking out to watch her favorite band Firewalk perform at the Old Mill, otherwise known as an abandoned sawmill turned into a local punk club. First impressions, this game looks absolutely phenomenal. The graphics and animations are a huge step up compared to how they were in the first game, which is really saying a lot. It's also important to note that Chloe has a different voice now. In the first game, Chloe was voiced by Ashley Birch, who has since been promoted to the story writer for this game. Here, Chloe is voiced by Rihanna DeVries, and even though Ashley Birch is the definitive voice actress for Chloe, I still think Rihanna did a wonderful job here. The other characters who make a return were also voiced by entirely new people. Another major change involves the dialogue choices, specifically the addition of backtalk challenges. These backtalk challenges appear pretty frequently throughout the game, and they basically act as a replacement for the rewind abilities from the first game, since Chloe obviously doesn't possess any of those powers. While I understand what they were going for when it came to implementing this feature, I do have some qualms with it, but we'll get to those a little bit later in the video. Anyways, back to our story. We convinced this bouncer guy to let us in, rip off some guy selling Firewalk t-shirts, meet up with a familiar acquaintance, and then bump into these two skeevy assholes. But arguably the most important thing that happens here is we finally get to meet Rachel Amber in the flesh, as opposed to just seeing her on a missing persons poster. And yeah, these moments between Chloe and Rachel are easily the highlights of the game for me. No longer is Rachel Amber this mysterious girl only referenced through pictures and other characters' voice lines. She's an actual character with dialogue and plays a key role in the story here. It's almost as if she was like a silent protagonist in the previous game, kind of like the ones that you see in the Call of Duty series. But it is also through these moments between Chloe and Rachel that we find out just how crazy this girl actually is. For one, she's always putting Chloe on the spot, whether it's asking her to voice her opinion publicly or getting her to participate in a play that she has zero desire to be in. It also appears that no matter what options you choose, Rachel will be able to successfully determine what truths and lies you told, as well as whether you cheated or not during the 2 truths and a lie minigame in episode 1. And as if that wasn't enough, she eventually finds out that her father is having an affair with someone, which angers her so much that she starts a literal forest fire. I understand why that might have upset her, but damn, was the forest fire really that necessary? To be fair though, fire is actually a key symbol of this game's storyline, and in my opinion, no other character in the game better encapsulates it than Rachel Amber. It's actually kind of fitting because the fire itself started at what seemed to be the peak of her and Chloe's relationship, only to be washed out when everything slows down to a crawl. Another great example of the amazing detail that this series is very well known for. But as much as I enjoyed seeing Rachel Amber on screen, I do have some problems with this character that I feel as though need to be addressed. While it was established in the first game that Rachel Amber had met and even had a relationship with one of two characters whom also returned for this game, unfortunately, we don't see how any of that unfolds here whatsoever. I understand that the primary focus for this game was set on Chloe's past, and that's fine, but I do think this game could have benefited from a little bit more of Rachel Amber's perspective. In fact, I'd even make the bold claim and go as far as to say that a lot of these moments that take place in Chloe's story are honestly just filler at the end of the day. The one exception to that rule being the scenes with William. Honestly, these scenes are anything but filler. The symbolism combined with the intricate details and amazing dialogue make these moments some of my favorite scenes in the entire game. I also found it crazy how the exact same car that he died in was later revealed to be rotting away in the junkyard. It seems like a lot of crazy things happen in the junkyard, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, aside from those great scenes, I honestly hate to report that the rest of the game is mostly filler. Probably the best example of that in the game is the character of Skip Matthews. In my humble and honest opinion, Skip Matthews is the worst character in this game, hands down. And it has nothing to do with his personality or the way he treats Chloe, but rather the way he was written into the story. To put it simply, you can basically write this guy out of the story completely and it wouldn't make any difference. Now already, that in of itself isn't exactly a good sign, but what makes it even worse is largely due to the role that he plays throughout his time on screen. He's supposed to be the Blackwell security guard, a role that would eventually belong to one of the most pivotal characters in the first game. David Madsen from Life is Strange 1 was arguably one of the most interesting roles in that game's story. And with that knowledge in mind, you would expect Skip Matthews to hold a similar reputation and arguably be just as important as David Madsen would become, right?
No.
Skip's role in this game is meaningless. He doesn't add anything to the story, nor does any of his dialogue hold any merit whatsoever. The backtalk challenge that he has in episode 2 also doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, like I said before, I do understand what they were going for when it came to implementing these backtalk challenges, and to be fair, they're not all completely terrible. But this one against Skip Matthews that takes place in episode 2 is easily a contender for the worst one in the game. Firstly, regardless of whether or not you fail or succeed in the backtalk challenge, has no effect on the story whatsoever. Skip gives in to Chloe's demands, she's allowed into the school, etc, etc. But it's the logic behind this backtalk challenge that I absolutely just can't wrap my head around. In episode 3, Skip can be seen giving an interview on one of the articles located on Chloe's computer. What he says in this interview is entirely dependent on the backtalk challenge in the previous episode. If Chloe succeeds in the backtalk challenge, Skip will comment about keeping your day job, and how sometimes you have to do what you have to do even if it's holding you back. I'd argue that's what you're doing to the story here, but I digress. But it's what happens when you fail the backtalk challenge that really intrigues me. He talks about when to quit your job and how he just felt the need to quote-unquote channel that feeling into something new. Now, considering the information I just gave you and the events that take place in the next game, here's my big question. Why the hell would I want to succeed in this backtalk challenge? It logically makes zero sense for Skip to keep his job because by the events of the next game, he will already have been replaced by David Madsen. And this isn't the only backtalk challenge in the game with this problem, as there are others that also make me question what the devs were thinking. But yeah, to quickly summarize, I just feel as though the developers had a great opportunity to make Skip such an interesting character, considering his role and all that. But no, instead, all we get is some guy who thinks he's cool because he asked some kid's mom to move her Mercedes, only to disappear by the time episode 3 begins. What a wasted opportunity for such great storytelling. Alright, now that we finally have that rant out of the way, I think it's time we start taking a look at some of the other characters this game has to offer. And to be honest with you, they are better, but not by much. I'm really not sure what it is, to be honest with you. Like, on one hand, I enjoy seeing all of the old characters returning from the first game, and some of the new additions are great as well. But at the same time, I can't help but question their existence in the story. Like Evan, for example. He only appears twice throughout the whole game, and his only purpose is to get in Chloe's way during the second episode. Also, apparently Nathan has a girlfriend now, which is interesting. I just find it rather odd because it's like, he never once mentioned having a girlfriend in the first game, nor was it ever implied, so it's like, I don't know, it just feels like she was kind of shoehorned into the story. But there is at least some interesting dialogue that can play out between her and Chloe depending on your choices, so there's that, I guess. As far as the actual gameplay goes, it's mostly the same as the original, minus the backtalk challenges and the lack of the rewind abilities. There's also the ability to change our outfits now, if you can even call that a new feature. Through performing specific actions throughout the game, you can actually find and collect a variety of shirts to add to your wardrobe. It really doesn't change much, honestly, but it does give you a variety of cool outfits to add to your wardrobe, if that's the sort of thing that you're into. But back to the subject of characters, we still have some important matters to discuss. I mentioned David Madsen when I was talking about Skip Matthews, and yes, he does actually make a return for this game as well. I think it was only fair for the developers to expand upon his dynamic with Chloe from the first game, and to be honest, I actually think they did a pretty good job, with a few exceptions. Of course, this complaint wouldn't be possible without the topic of backtalk challenges, and surprise surprise, this one really is no better than the last one. Now this backtalk challenge is less frustrating with how much it affects the logic of the story, and more so just by how pointless it proves to be. It really doesn't matter what you choose to say in this dialogue sequence in general. I mean, even choosing not to participate in the backtalk challenge doesn't really change the outcome whatsoever. But this isn't the only scene with David Madsen that I have a problem with. As I've been alluding to throughout this review, it appears as though that most of your choices in this game do not affect the overall outcome. And in all honesty, no scene in the game is a greater example of that than this one right here. It's kind of ironic actually, because believe it or not, this is one of my favorite scenes in the game. David opening up to Chloe like this is unlike anything he ever did before, keep that in mind, and in all honesty, it was a great bonding moment for these two whom usually act like the last thing they want to do is speak to each other. But as much as I love this scene, I'm going to summarize the problem I have with it in 3 simple words. It doesn't matter. Not a single bit of it is taken into account by the events of the next game because guess what? Chloe and David are already back to square one of their relationship by then, which makes what are otherwise great scenes like this utterly pointless at the end of the day. Which brings me back to what I was saying before. A good portion of the choices you make in this game don't add any overall value to the outcomes presented, which means that unfortunately, you spend a lot of time walking around experiencing nothing but filler content. Which brings me back to another point that I made earlier in this video. How come Rachel Amber got all this interesting backstory that was touched upon in the first game, all of which has little to no coverage in this game whatsoever? We do have one interesting revelation at least. The woman that her dad ended up making out with in episode 1 turned out to be her actual mother. But aside from that and her relationship with Chloe, I think Rachel is severely underutilized. They had a great opportunity to really flesh out this character, but unfortunately, a lot of it was wasted in my opinion. Hell, you can make the argument that the same thing applies to a lot of the other characters in this game. They're either severely underutilized or so pointless that they should just be written out of the story completely. And I think a lot of these issues that I mentioned have more so to do with the fact that for some reason, This game only has a total of 3 episodes. I'm not sure if this is a result of rushed development or an actual decision that was made by someone over at Deck 9, but I do feel like if this game had more than 3 episodes, it would have given the developers a bigger opportunity to flesh out all of these characters we have in the game. They could have focused on the more important characters, and as for the ones that serve little purpose, either find a way to integrate them better into the story, or just write them out entirely. There really is no excuse to have this much filler in the game. It's honestly crazy. I really want to like this game as much as I did the first one, but unfortunately, this filler content says otherwise. As for the other characters, there really isn't much I have left to say. I thought Damon Merrick was a pretty interesting villain, but in saying that, he definitely isn't as memorable as Mark Jefferson was from the first game. That being said, he does still have some great scenes throughout the game, so I guess he could have been handled a lot worse in that regard. I also thought that the dynamic between Rachel and her father was pretty interesting. I can't say that I blame him for not allowing Rachel to meet her mother due to her abusive drug habits, but him hiring Damon Merrick to quite literally take her mom completely out of the picture was also something that sparked a lot of controversy as well. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say when it comes to the main story. It's a damn shame, honestly, because I really don't hate this game, but at the end of the day, the majority of the experience has left me feeling rather disappointed. If you're like me and you wanted more from this game after your first playthrough, then you likely played the Farewell DLC right after the last episode. Set before the main events of Before the Storm, this episode revolves around Chloe's last moments with Max before her departure. It's a pretty gut-wrenching episode, all things considered. It starts off fairly lighthearted with the two participating in what would be their last pirate adventure. Things seem fairly normal at first. They find some buried treasure in the backyard, which happens to contain a secret message from Chloe's father. He tells them just how proud he is of both of them, which would end up being the last thing he would ever say to them, as later it is revealed that this episode takes place just moments before he died. The episode ends with Chloe listening to Max's goodbye message, which can change depending on your choices throughout the episode, and the screen fades out as Chloe curls up on the floor crying in despair. It's some pretty heavy storytelling, and the fact that this is where the episode ends doesn't make it any better if I'm being honest with you. But as much as I enjoyed playing through this episode, just like the rest of the game, it doesn't come without its fair share of issues. The first one has to do with how oddly placed this episode feels. I feel like having to play this as the last episode is kind of off-putting. If this episode is played first, I feel like it provides a nice segue into the main events of the story. The other problem that I have with this episode is the fact that Max is the only playable character throughout the experience. Don't get me wrong, I thoroughly enjoyed seeing Max return after not being present for 3 episodes, but this game is supposed to be about Chloe, so it would only make more sense if we got to play as her. In fact, it actually makes less sense to play as Max over Chloe in this episode because at this point in the story, she didn't even have her rewind abilities. But with those issues aside, I thoroughly enjoyed this DLC. Overall, what more can I say about this game? It's a disappointing mess that had such great potential to be a successful follow-up to the first game. But with characters that are severely underutilized, a challenge system that makes absolutely no sense, and dialogue that is somehow worse and far more cringier than anything from the original game, overall, this game can't even come close to matching the same score as the first one. But to end this review on a high note, I would like to quickly talk about this game's soundtrack before I give it a final score. Just like with the first game's soundtrack, the music in this game is absolutely phenomenal. Dare I say, even better than the first game. But I think what's more important than anything else is the fact that these games' soundtracks perfectly capture the two main characters almost seamlessly. Max's theme from the first game is more hopeful and lighthearted, whereas Chloe's theme from this game is more dark and definitely depressing. And I think it really helps to capture the feelings that these characters get throughout their respective experiences. The main menu soundtracks from both of these games are definitely some of the most memorable pieces of music I've ever heard from a video game. But unfortunately, as much as I love this game's music, it does not change how I feel about the rest of the experience. It's still pretty shallow at times in terms of story, and the characters could have been written so much better in my opinion. While I don't hate this game or think it's terrible by any means, it's pretty obvious that it does not live up to the standards that the first game presented to us. And that is why I'm giving it the final score of 6 out of 10.